So, what do you think about the recent announcement of the British government to remove passport or citizenship to Britons who have been fighting in Iraq or Syria?
I mean, I think it's completely misplaced in terms of its thinking. They really haven't thought this through well at all. I mean, they're already, the first point that we should make is that they're already removing passports and citizenships. You know, there's been over 50 people who have had that happen to them. And so this is very much a kind of a rhetoric that's coming out of the government to show that they're very tough on terrorism. But the reality is that when we think about what's going on in Iraq right now, the Islamic State has been established because of the disenfranchisement that people feel in relation to even the concept of a nation state and how it represents their interests. So in many ways it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy when you start talking about people removing people's citizenships, because if they don't belong and if they don't have rights to a country, then really who does protect their rights? Where do they get those rights from? You know, you can't just pass on the problem to somebody else because they won't feel that that's their home. So this is the thing, that the Islamic State in many ways is you know, kind of providing an answer to many of the concerns that a lot of these young men have around what it means to belong to a community or society.
Still, it's true that many horrendous things have been done by the IS, and many foreign fighters are having difficulties themselves to bear with that. What's your take on that?
Of course, I mean, anybody who goes out to a conflict zone is going to experience a degree of trauma because these are extremely traumatic things that we're talking about. But I think, you know, the idea that the UK government needs to protect our citizens from going out there because they're going to come back traumatized, I think is a little bit misplaced. What we need to do is help these people deal with that trauma on their return. But to say that, well, aid workers shouldn't go out there because they're going to see things that are very, very difficult for them to bear, well, actually, that's what aid workers are there for. They're there to help. They're there to help people who are going through something extremely difficult, and they shouldn't be criminalized or castigated simply for that reason. And definitely, they shouldn't be assumed to somehow becoming susceptible to radicalization or becoming some kind of terrorist just because they've seen that trauma. I don't think that the two marry up with one another.
To put it very bluntly, Cameron said ICE is a direct threat to Europe now, and he's thinking about those who have already come back, and he's afraid of attacks in the homeland, so in the UK and you don't feel that threat, or am I wrong?
Well, we feel that threat now, ever since the rhetoric changed around intervention in the Middle East. You know, actually it wasn't up until now part of IS's mission, or even any of the groups that were fighting in Syria, at least anyway, to carry out atrocities or attacks here in the UK. But, you know, as we predicted ourselves, and we said that if you start intervening in these conflicts, then what will happen is that the potential for somebody to come back and do something will increase. But forget about coming back, because actually most of these people don't want to come back. They've got what they wanted, which is you know, an Islamic State, and they want to stay out there. What we're more worried about is people here in the UK who will become increasingly disenfranchised with their government's foreign policy again when they see that they are, you know, taking a very hawkish stand towards the Middle East, especially when there's double standards. So it's okay for Israel to carry out mass atrocities and abuses, and even for Bashar al-Assad too. But when it comes to, say, for example, Libya, where they have vested commercial interests, that they're willing to intervene. These kinds of discrepancies are not lost on the Muslim community in the UK, and they're not lost on the general population either. And I think it's important that the government understands that, you know, people feel part of their society, and they don't feel so disenfranchised when they feel they can trust their government. But these double standards really don't make it easy.
On Channel 4, you've been asked about condemning the IS. Why do you think that there is a double standard also vis-à-vis of the atrocities that IS is doing?
Well, look, I think we need to put everything in its place. As a Muslim, any kind of atrocity, we have to condemn it. And whether it's a Muslim or non-Muslim, whether it's IS or Jabhat al-Nusra Ahrar al-Sham or Jabhat al-Islamiyya or any group, any state even, whether it's Saudi Arabia or Morocco or whoever, the Gulf countries carry out abuses every single day, far worse in many cases than what's taking place by IS. And so we condemn where atrocities take place, and we condemn where, for example, our own countries like the UK, and for Americans the US, they commit mass violence against civilian populations in unlawful wars. So I think that this is the point here, that where atrocities take place, yes, they must be condemned. They must be spoken out against, but more importantly, there has to be accountability when these things take place, because without accountability, people will continue to feel as if their governments are not interested in justice and they're just interested in covering up their own abuses.
How would you welcome those who come back as foreign fighters? What do you do to them? Would you suggest some retraining or psychological help? How would you welcome them?
For a start, I wouldn't treat them like criminals. I think it's important then when people come back from conflicts like Syria that they're welcome back, that the assumption is that they fought within the laws of war, within the Geneva Conventions, that they conducted themselves in an appropriate manner to the civilian population. If they are responsible for war crimes, then it's important that those war crimes were investigated. But if not, then they should be helped to reintegrate back into society to make sure that there's no lasting trauma, and that they're actually in many ways welcomed and praised for the role that they played in defending a civilian population against a brutal dictator.